I was lying strapped to an operating table at the Madigan Army Medical Center at Joint Base Lewis McChord, the sterile lights burning into my eyes. A routine helicopter training exercise had gone wrong, and now my spine was a ticking time bomb. The surgeon's voice was grim. "Major Whitaker, we operate within 2 hours or you may never walk again." Through the open door, I could see my 7-year-old twin boys Noah and Mason fast asleep on a lumpy hospital waiting room bench, their tiny faces etched with exhaustion because I couldn't find anyone to take them. In desperation, I called my parents, begging, "I just need you to watch the boys for one day." My mother's response was ice cold. They had an Alaskan cruise booked and couldn't cancel their plans for my problem. My father even sneered, "If you can't handle your own kids, you shouldn't have had them." I hung up, feeling my heart crumble inside me. Forced to spend my limited funds on an emergency $700 a day nanny service, I felt utterly alone. But what I didn't know was that a silent ally in the hospital had already made a call to my grandfather, General Leonard Whitaker. Before I tell you what happened when the general found out the truth, if you can't believe the coldness of this family and love seeing justice served, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from. To truly understand the visceral pain of that hospital call, you have to understand the dynamic that defined my entire life growing up in Tacoma. In the Whitaker household, the sun rose and set according to my younger brother Derek. It was an unspoken yet absolute rule. Derek's needs, desires, and even his spectacular failures were the central focus. I, on the other hand, was expected to be strong, self-sufficient, and invisible, unless needed as a supporting character in his narrative. Derek was the golden child who could do no wrong despite doing very little right. He dropped out of college not once, but twice, squandering tens of thousands of dollars my parents could ill afford. Each time, instead of tough love, he was met with comfort and excuses. They firmly believed with almost delusional conviction that he was the family legacy, the one who would somehow, despite zero evidence of ambition or competence, carry the Whitaker name to greatness. They coddled him, funded his aimless lifestyle, and sheltered him from any real consequence. Contrast that with my path. I knew early on that I couldn't rely on them for support. So at 21, I forged my own way and enlisted in the U.S. Army. I wanted something they couldn't give me: discipline, purpose, and a sense of belonging based on merit, not favoritism. I built my career brick by brick, earning my commission and rising to the rank of major through grit and determination, not coddling. While Derek was sleeping in, I was waking up for 0500 Pacific Time sessions. While he was crashing cars, I was managing complex logistics operations. I didn't ask for their praise, nor did I expect it, but the stark difference in how we were treated was always a dull ache. My life wasn't just about my career, though. I had built a beautiful but all too brief family. When my beloved husband was killed in a devastating car crash 4 years ago, my world fractured. Suddenly, I wasn't just an Army officer. I was a single mother of twin boys, Noah and Mason, struggling to navigate overwhelming grief while also being their sole provider and protector. It was without a doubt the hardest period of my life. The physical, emotional, and financial strain was immense. Yet even in my darkest hours, my parents' support was minimal, their concern often feeling obligatory and shallow compared to their constant fretting worry over Derek's latest minor inconvenience. Despite this, I was still conditioned to believe in the sacredness of family bonds. I thought that by demonstrating loyalty and generosity, I might finally earn a fraction of the love they showered on Derek. Over the last 6 years, I have quietly and consistently funneled money to them. I have meticulously documented it all, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need to show my worth. My records prove I've sent them a total of $64,000. This wasn't fun money. This hard-earned cash, part of my salary and savings, went directly toward essential needs they couldn't meet themselves. I paid for critical home repairs when their roof leaked and the furnace failed. I sent large sums to help pay off their mortgage, ensuring they had a stable place to live as they aged. But the most bitter pill to swallow was that a significant portion of that money didn't even benefit them directly. It was used to bail Derek out time and time again, paying off his staggering credit card debts and covering his reckless spending, all while he refused to get a job and continued to live off their enabling generosity. Whenever I questioned this, whenever I subtly suggested Derek needed to start carrying his own weight, my parents would use the same manipulative refrain, "Alyssa family must help each other. It's what we do." Their eyes would well with crocodile tears, and I, desperate to believe that this logic applied to everyone in the family, would swallow my resentment and send another check. I sincerely believed in that motto, in that fundamental principle of unconditional support, right up until the very moment I desperately needed that help to be returned, only to find it was a one-way street leading exclusively to Derek. The sterile, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor in the emergency room felt like a countdown to my own obsolescence. The surgeon had been blunt, the window was closing. Every minute that passed without intervention increased the risk that my legs would become nothing more than dead weight for the rest of my life. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my chest, not just for myself, but for Noah and Mason. I reached for my phone one last time, my hands trembling as I dialed my parents' number, praying that the gravity of the situation had finally sunk in. When my mother answered, there was no "hello" or "are you okay?" Instead, there was a sharp click, followed by the hollow, echoing sound of a speakerphone. I was being broadcast to their entire living room. "Mom." I rasped, my voice cracking from the pain medication and pure exhaustion. "The doctors are prepping the OR. I'm going under in less than an hour. I'm begging you, please just come get the boys. They're terrified, and I have no one." Before she could speak, a familiar mocking snicker cut through the line. It was Derek. I could practically see him leaning back on their sofa, probably nursing a drink I had paid for. "Oh, come on, Alyssa." Derek's voice oozed with derision. "You're a big, tough U.S. Army aviation officer, right? You manage millions of dollars in equipment, but you're telling us you're too incompetent to hire a babysitter. Maybe the military isn't as selective as it used to be." The cruelty of his words felt like a physical blow. My own brother was mocking my career and my desperation while I lay broken on a gurney. I waited for my mother to defend me, to silence him, to remember that I was her daughter. Instead, her voice came through thin and annoyed. "Alyssa, Derek has a point," she said, her tone devoid of any maternal warmth. "You chose this career. You chose to be a single mother. We have worked hard all our lives, and we finally treated ourselves to this $4,000 Alaskan cruise. It's non-refundable, honey. We can't just throw away $4,000 and ruin our vacation because you had a work accident. It's simply not fair to us." "Mom, listen to me," I whispered, tears finally stinging my eyes. "This isn't just a problem. If they don't operate now, I might lose the ability to walk. I could be in a wheelchair forever. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" There was a brief, agonizing silence on the other end. Then my father's voice boomed in the background, gruff and impatient. "Look, Alyssa, we're packing. If you're in this mess, it's because of the risks you took. That's your cross to bear. If you can't walk, that's a tragedy, sure, but it's not our fault. We didn't break your back, so don't try to guilt trip us into ruining our retirement over it. Stop being so dramatic and figure it out." The line went dead. The silence that followed in that hospital room was louder than any explosion I had ever heard during my service. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, feeling a profound sense of orphanhood, while both my parents were still alive. They weren't just indifferent. They were actively hostile to my survival because it inconvenienced their luxury. Just then, a small, warm hand slipped into mine. I looked down to see Mason. He and Noah had stirred awake from the noise. Their hair was messy, their eyes red-rimmed and confused by the harsh fluorescent lights. "Mommy," Noah asked, his voice small and trembling. Is Grandma coming to get us? Are we going to her house? I looked at my two beautiful boys, the children my father said I shouldn't have had if I couldn't handle them. I looked at their innocent, hopeful faces waiting for the comfort of a family that had just abandoned us for a boat trip. The lump in my throat was so thick I could barely breathe. How do you tell a 7-year-old that the people who are supposed to love them the most value a cruise ticket more than their mother's life? I couldn't. I just squeezed Mason's hand, pulled Noah closer to the side of the bed, and forced a lie through my teeth. Grandma and Grandpa can't make it, sweetie. I choked out, my heart breaking into a million jagged pieces. But don't worry. Mommy is going to take care of everything, I promise. As the nurses arrived to wheel me toward the operating theater, leaving my children with a stranger I had just hired over the phone, I realized the family I had spent $64,000 trying to buy back was gone. And in that moment of absolute betrayal, the sadness began to harden into something else. Something colder. Something that felt a lot like resolve. The 5 hours I spent under the knife were a hollow blank, but waking up was a brutal return to reality. As the anesthesia fog cleared in the recovery room, the first thing I did, against every instinct of physical pain, was reach for my phone. My spine felt like it had been fused with jagged glass, but the ache in my chest was sharper. I checked the screen. Nothing. No missed calls. No. Are you out of surgery? Text. No. How are the boys? My parents were likely somewhere in the middle of the inside passage, sipping cocktails and watching glaciers melt, completely unbothered by the fact that their daughter had been under a surgeon's blade. For the 3 days that followed, while I struggled to take my first agonizing steps with a walker, the only person looking after my world was a woman I had met on a childcare app. The nanny service cost me $700 a day. By the time I was cleared for discharge, I had swiped my card for $200, nearly every cent I had left in my liquid savings. I sat on the edge of that thin hospital mattress, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air, and for the first time since I took my oath at West Point, I broke. I didn't just tear up, I sobbed. I wept for the husband who wasn't there to hold my hand, for my boys who had to be comforted by a stranger, and for the realization that I was functionally an orphan. In the quiet of that room, the soldier in me finally performed a different kind of reconnaissance. I looked at the facts. For 6 years, I had been the silent architect of my parents' comfort. I had been the emergency fund, the safety net, and the ATM. I was only family when a bill was due. When I was the one bleeding, I was just a problem. The redemption part of my story didn't start with a miracle. It started with a cold, hard boundary. The morning of my discharge, I didn't call a cab first. I called my bank. I need to close the joint secondary account ending in 4402. I told the representative, my voice devoid of the emotion that had wrecked me the night before. That was the account my parents used for emergencies, the one I had diligently topped up every month. Done, Major Whitaker, the voice replied. Next, I went into my recurring transfers. I deleted the $1,200 monthly payment that covered their mortgage and Derek's allowance. I felt a strange electric jolt of freedom with every click. I was no longer subsidizing my own erasure. Finally, I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Derek's name. I thought about his laughter on the speakerphone mocking my career while I faced paralysis. I didn't send a grand parting message. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an explanation. I simply tapped his profile and hit block. As I wheeled myself out of the hospital entrance, squinting against the Washington sun, I wasn't just recovering from surgery. I was amputating the toxicity that had been draining my life for a decade. I was a major in the United States Army, a mother of 2, and for the first time I was no longer a victim of my own misplaced loyalty. I was going home to my sons. And I was going to wait for the storm to hit the Whitaker household when the money stopped flowing. The silence following my departure from the hospital was short-lived. A week into my recovery, as I sat on my porch in Tacoma watching Noah and Mason play in the yard, my phone vibrated. The caller ID made my heart skip. Lieutenant General Leonard Whitaker, retired. My grandfather was a man of steel and shadows. He had built Whitaker Defense Systems from the ground up after retiring from the Army, and he ran his family with the same uncompromising tactical precision he used to command divisions. We had always been close in a quiet, respectful way. He saw the soldier in me, but he lived a world away in his Pierce County estate. Alyssa. His voice crackled over the line, deep and resonant. Why did a social worker from Madigan call my office 4 days ago asking for an emergency secondary contact for your sons? I froze. I had tried so hard to keep the mess contained. It was just a precaution, Grandpa. I had a bit of a procedure. Everything is fine now. Don't lie to a general major. It's beneath your rank. He snapped through the edge and his voice wasn't directed at me. I called your mother. She told me she couldn't help because she was on a boat. She also mentioned you've become financially unstable and stopped supporting them. I want the truth. All of it. The dam finally broke. I told him about the $64,000 I'd funneled into a bottomless pit. I told him about the mockery on the speakerphone, the $2,100 nanny bill I could barely afford, and the fact that I had almost lost the ability to walk while my parents were worrying about their cruise itinerary. The silence on the other end was terrifying. When Leonard Whitaker was quiet, it meant he was calculating. I am turning 80 next month, he said finally. I'm hosting a dinner at the estate. The whole clan will be there. Your parents, that parasite Derek, the cousins, everyone. Grandpa, I don't think I can face them right now, I admitted, clutching my cane. You will be there, Alyssa. And you will bring your laptop and every bank statement, wire transfer receipt, and hospital bill from the last 6 years. It's time I updated my will and the board structure for Whitaker Defense Systems. There are a few things that need to be made very clear to your father and brother before I finalize my legacy. He paused, his voice softening just a fraction. The Whitakers are supposed to be a lineage of service and strength. It seems some branches of the tree have rotted. We're going to do some pruning. Bring the boys. I've already cleared a room for you. I hung up, a cold shiver running down my spine. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a court-martial. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a struggling single mother or an abandoned daughter. I felt like a soldier being handed a mission. My parents thought they had won because they got their cruise. Derek thought he had won because he'd bled me dry. They had no idea that by abandoning me in that hospital, they had closed the door on the only person who was keeping them afloat and opened a door to the one man who could take everything else away. The drive to my grandfather's estate in Pierce County felt like a tactical deployment. My spine still twinged with every bump in the road, a constant reminder of the surgery my parents had deemed not their problem. In the back seat, Noah and Mason were dressed in their best suits, oblivious to the storm brewing. In my bag, tucked away like a loaded weapon, was a folder containing 6 years of financial records. The Whitaker estate was a sprawling fortress of glass and cedar overlooking the Puget Sound. As I walked into the grand ballroom, leaning slightly on a polished black cane, the air changed instantly. The chatter dipped, then shifted into a series of sharp, judgmental whispers. I didn't have to guess what had been said. My mother, Carol, was standing near the buffet, surrounded by my aunts and cousins. She was holding a glass of wine, her face twisted into a mask of performed tragedy. As I passed, I caught the tail end of her performance. And she just cut us off. My mother sighed, dabbing a non-existent tear. No warning, no explanation. After all the sacrifices we made to help her through the military, she decided that her army paycheck was too good for her own parents. It's the greed, you know, it changes people. A few feet away, Derek was the center of a different circle. He looked sleek in an expensive suit, likely bought with the last gift I had sent. He was shaking his head, his voice loud enough to carry. It's not just the money, it's the neglect. She's so obsessed with her major title that she leaves my nephews with total strangers. When she had her little back issue, she didn't even call us. She just hired some random person off the street so she could play soldier. It's heartbreaking for the kids. One of my aunts looked at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. To think we were proud of your uniform, Alyssa. Being an officer doesn't give you the right to be ungrateful. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I was being branded a villain for stopping the flow of cash they had stolen, and a negligent mother for the very emergency they had abandoned me in. My father, Ronald, stood by the fireplace, refusing to even meet my eyes, acting the part of the stoic, wounded patriarch. I felt the heat rising in my neck, the urge to scream the truth until the windows rattled. But I was a logistics officer. I knew that a premature strike is a wasted strike. I didn't engage. I didn't defend myself. I simply found a chair in the corner, sat my boys down with some juice, and rested my hands on my folder. I watched Derek laugh. I watched my mother soak up the sympathy of the extended family. They were so comfortable in their lies, so certain of their power over the family narrative. They thought this was a victory lap. They had no idea that Grandfather Leonard wasn't in his study because he was tired. He was in there reviewing the digital copies I had sent him an hour before I arrived. I just sat there, a silent soldier in a room full of ghosts, waiting for the general to call the room to order. Have you ever been in a situation where someone twisted the facts so badly that you became the villain in your own story? It's a lonely, infuriating feeling to watch people play the victim while they're holding the smoking gun. If you've ever had to stay silent while the truth was being dragged through the mud, comment the word truth below. The heavy oak doors of the study swung open and the room fell into a sudden, respectful hush. Lieutenant General Leonard Whitaker walked in his presence, commanding the space like a physical force. He didn't go to the head of the table. He stood right in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his family until they landed on my parents. Quite a lively discussion tonight. The general said, his voice low and dangerous. I've heard a lot about ingratitude and neglect. Ronald Carroll, stand up. My parents exchanged a confused, slightly panicked look before rising. The cousins and aunts leaned in, expecting the general to join in on my public shaming. I want to hear it from you, Leonard said, his gaze piercing. Did you refuse to care for your grandsons when your daughter was being wheeled into emergency spinal surgery at Madigan? My father cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Dad, it wasn't like that. We didn't realize the situation was that grave. Alyssa has a tendency to be theatrical about her army duties. We thought it was just a routine checkup she was blowing out of proportion. Exactly. Derek chimed in from the side, a smug grin on his face. She's always looking for a way to play the hero or the martyr. She probably exaggerated the emergency just to see if she could pull us away from our vacation and keep us under her thumb. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at Derek. I simply stood up, leaning on my cane, and walked toward the center table. I opened the folder. I'm a logistics officer, Derek, I said quietly. In my world, facts aren't theatrical. They are data points. I laid the first document down. This is the surgical schedule from Madigan Army Medical Center. It is marked urgent, immediate. It was time-stamped 1 hour before I called you. I laid the second document down. These are the transcripts of our text messages and the call logs. In them, I specifically told you the surgeon warned I might never walk again. Your response, Mom, was that your $4,000 cruise was non-refundable. Finally, I laid down the bank statement. And this is the invoice from the emergency nanny service. $2,100 for 3 days. Money I had to scramble to find because I was busy sending $1,200 a month to your emergency joint account. The silence that followed was absolute. The relatives who had been whispering slurs at me moments ago suddenly found their shoes very interesting. My mother's face turned a blotchy, panicked red. My father's jaw tightened, but he had no rebuttal for the paper trail. She's twisting things. My mother stammered, looking around for support. We've done so much for her. Silence, Leonard commanded. The word rang out like a gunshot. He looked at the documents, then back at my parents with a look of pure disgust. I spent 40 years leading soldiers. I can spot a deserter from a mile away. You didn't just abandon your daughter. You abandoned your post as a family. He turned to the rest of the room. But there's something else you all should see. Something Alyssa didn't even know until I started digging into the Whitaker Defense Trust yesterday. The general pulled a single sheet of paper from his own jacket pocket. The money Alyssa was sending home to help with the mortgage and fix the roof, it never went to the house. My heart stopped. I looked at the paper. It was a ledger of transfers from my parents' joint account to a private brokerage. Every cent Alyssa sent to support her parents. The general announced, his voice vibrating with rage, was immediately transferred into a high-risk cryptocurrency wallet registered to one person. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Derek. Your golden child didn't just let his sister suffer, he was living off her blood for years. The air in the ballroom grew thick, almost suffocating, as the general laid the brokerage statements on the mahogany table. My eyes scanned the numbers, but my brain struggled to process the sheer scale of the deception. The $64,000 I had sent over the years hadn't been a safety net for my aging parents. It had been a slush fund for my brother's delusions of grandeur. Look at the dates, Alyssa. Grandfather Leonard said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that carried more weight than a shout. I leaned forward, my hand gripping my cane so hard the knuckles turned white. 3 months ago, I had sent $18,000, a massive chunk of my savings, after my mother called me crying, claiming the bank was threatening to foreclose on their home. I had worked double shifts, skipped vacations with my boys, and tightened my belt until it bruised just to save their dignity. But the ledger showed a different story. Within 48 hours of my transfer, that $18,000 had been moved into a high-leverage crypto trading account in Derek's name. It wasn't for a mortgage. It was for a gamble. He lost it all in 6 weeks. The general revealed, looking at Derek with a mixture of pity and loathing. And when Alyssa called from the hospital, Derek knew that if Ronald and Carol stayed behind to help her, they would start asking where that mortgage money went. He knew they would find out the house was never in danger, but his investment was gone. The room erupted in a chorus of gasps. My aunts, who had been sneering at me moments ago, now looked at Derek as if he were a poisonous snake. The betrayal was layered like an onion. Derek hadn't just mocked me on the speakerphone. He had actively manipulated my parents into abandoning me to protect his own skin. He had convinced them that I was exaggerating, because if they had shown up at the hospital, the truth about the $18,000 would have come out. Derek's smug facade finally shattered. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. I was going to pay it back. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. It was a sure thing, I just needed a little more time. Alyssa has plenty of money, she's a major. She didn't need that 18 grand as much as I needed to fix the account. My mother collapsed into a chair, finally realizing she had sacrificed her daughter's health and her grandson's safety for a lie told by her favorite child. Derek, you said the bank called. You said Alyssa was just trying to control us. He used your greed and his own desperation to leave a soldier for dead. Leonard growled. He stepped toward the head of the table, his posture straightening into the terrifying silhouette of the man who had commanded thousands. The family held its breath, expecting him to disown Derek or shout. Instead, he did something much worse. He looked at my father, then at Derek, and finally at the entire room. He let the silence hang for a long, agonizing minute before he spoke the words that would change the trajectory of our lives forever. I've spent tonight watching a major of the United States Army stand tall while her own blood tried to cripple her, the general said. And it has made me realize that the Whitaker legacy isn't in this name, it's in her blood. He paused, his eyes glowing with a fierce, cold light. Which is why, he continued, I have already signed the paperwork to remove every single one of you except Alyssa from my life, my heart, and my bank accounts. As of 5 minutes ago, none of you are Whitakers anymore. The silence that followed was so profound, you could hear the waves crashing against the cliffs outside. My parents looked like they had been turned to stone. Derek looked like he was about to vomit. But the general wasn't finished. The general stood at the head of the long mahogany table silhouetted against the Pacific Northwest twilight. He looked at me with a pride I hadn't seen in decades, then turned his gaze toward my parents and Derek with a coldness that would have frozen a desert. For years I've watched this family coast on the reputation I built. Leonard began, his voice echoing with the authority of a 4-star command. I've watched Ronald live off his inheritance, and Derek live off his sister's sweat. But tonight the audit is over. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Alyssa is the only one in this room who understands the meaning of an oath. She is the only one who has ever truly worked not just for a paycheck, but for the lives of others and the honor of this country. While you were planning cruises with her money, she was navigating a helicopter through a storm to save soldiers she didn't even know. While you were gambling her savings on digital coins, she was learning to walk again so she could be a mother to her sons. He reached into his folder and pulled out a notarized document, sliding it across the table toward my father. I have updated my will and the corporate charter. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as chairman of Whitaker Defense Systems. I am transferring 100% of my shares, a controlling interest valued at $52 million, directly to Major Alyssa Whitaker. The collective gasp from the room was audible. My mother's glass of wine slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, but she didn't even flinch. My father's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. Dad, you can't be serious, my father sputtered, his voice trembling. That company is the family legacy. You're giving it to her. She's a soldier, not a CEO. What about Derek? What about our retirement? Derek surged forward, his desperation finally boiling over into a frantic, high-pitched scream. This is insane. I'm the son I was supposed to take over. You're giving $52 million to the person who just blocked us on her phone. She's vindictive. Grandpa, she's doing this to hurt us. Grandfather Leonard didn't even raise his voice. He simply looked at Derek with the pity one reserves for a terminal patient. You aren't a successor, Derek. You're a liability. You've already spent your inheritance. You spent every dime of the $18,000 Alyssa sent to save this family's home. You've been living on her future for 6 years. Consider that your payout. You are officially cashed out of this family. The room was silent as the weight of the moment settled. I felt the phantom pain in my spine, but for the first time I felt no weakness. I stood up, refusing to use my cane for a moment, and looked directly at the people who had left me to rot in a hospital bed. This isn't about the money, I said, my voice steady and clear, the tone of an officer addressing her troops. It's about the truth. For years I believed that if I gave enough, if I sacrificed enough, I could earn a place in this family. I was wrong. You didn't want a daughter or a sister. You wanted a benefactor. I looked at Derek, whose eyes were wide with a mix of rage and terror. Then I looked at my parents. The bank account I closed this morning. It's never reopening. The mortgage payments. They stopped today. The credit cards Derek has been using. They've already been flagged as stolen. From this moment forward, I am no longer the emergency fund for people who wouldn't even check on me when I was paralyzed. Alyssa, please, my mother whispered, finally finding her voice. We're your parents. You can't leave us with nothing. You told me that if I couldn't handle my own children, I shouldn't have had them. I replied coldly. I'm just following your logic, Mom. If you can't handle your own life without my paycheck, you shouldn't have lived so far beyond your means. I'm done. My mission is my sons and my service. You are officially on your own. A year has passed since that fateful night at the Whitaker estate, and the landscape of my life has shifted as dramatically as the Washington tides. I didn't quit the Army. The uniform is part of my skin, and the discipline of my service remains my North Star. I still serve at Joint Base Lewis McChord, but now my duties as a logistics officer are balanced with a seat on the board of Whitaker Defense Systems. My grandfather Leonard sits at my right hand watching with a proud smirk as I apply military precision to the corporate world. The most important change, however, is closer to home. Noah Mason and I moved into a beautiful new house in Tacoma, just minutes from the boys' school. There are no more emergency nanny calls or panicked nights wondering if I can afford the next month's rent. My sons are thriving, their laughter filling a home that is finally free from the heavy, suffocating cloud of family expectations and unearned guilt. The justice I sought wasn't loud or violent, it was simply the consequence of the truth. Without my monthly subsidies, the house of cards my parents lived in collapsed. Within 6 months, Ronald and Carol were forced to sell their suburban home. The mortgage I had been paying, the repairs I had funded, it all vanished once they had to face reality on their own. They live in a modest apartment now, their Alaskan cruises replaced by the stark realization that their golden child was nothing more than a lead weight. As for Derek, the bankruptcy hit him hard. With no sister to bleed dry and no parents with a home to shelter him, he packed his bags and moved to Idaho, chasing another get-rich-quick scheme that will likely end as poorly as the last. He hasn't called, and for the first time in my life, I don't care. The silence is the best gift he ever gave me. One golden afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the Olympic Mountains, I sat on my front porch resting my legs. My back still aches occasionally, a reminder of the surgery, but the pain is manageable. I watched Noah and Mason chasing a soccer ball across the grass, their shouts of joy echoing through the quiet street. Grandfather Leonard sat in the wicker chair beside me, a glass of iced tea in his hand. He watched the boys for a long time before turning to me. "You did more than just survive that night in the hospital, Alyssa," he said softly. "You broke the cycle. You stopped being a victim of their greed and started being the architect of your own legacy." I looked at my sons, then at the man who had stood by me when everyone else walked away. I realized that revenge wasn't about seeing my family lose everything, though that was a fair trade for what they did. The real victory was the redemption. It was reclaiming my worth, my peace, and my future. As the cool evening breeze brushed against my face, I leaned back and closed my eyes. For the first time in 34 years, the weight was gone. I wasn't just a soldier, a daughter, or a source of income. I was Alyssa Whitaker, and I was finally profoundly at peace. Thank you for following Alyssa's journey from betrayal to triumph. If you found inspiration in her strength and the General's justice, make sure to check out our other stories in the playlist below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience.